The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like a bone breaking. It was the sound of my future shattering. My name is Devin Cartwright, and at 18 years old, I was found guilty of a crime I didn't commit. The charge was armed robbery. The sentence was 10 years. But this story doesn't start in a courtroom. It starts 4 months earlier in a convenience store with a bottle of orange juice and a bag of chips. I was a typical high school senior, buried in college applications and the heavy, hopeful weight of my own potential. My father, Anton Cartwright, was a figure larger than life, an associate justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Our home was a temple to the law, filled with leather-bound books and the unwavering belief that the system, while imperfect, was fundamentally just. It was a belief I shared. I was going to be a lawyer, to follow in his footsteps. I was naive. That Tuesday, I stopped at the Pearl Street Mini-Mart after track practice. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and fried food. I grabbed my snack, paid the cashier, a jittery man who barely made eye contact, and left. It was a transaction that took less than 3 minutes. A blip in the universe. 2 days later, the universe corrected itself with a violent shove. The police were at our door. Officer Garrett, a man with a face like tired dough and eyes that had already tried and convicted me, led the charge. There had been a robbery at the Mini-Mart. The same cashier, now a traumatized victim, had identified me from a photo array. The description was generic: black male, teen, hoodie. I was one of 10,000 who fit that description in our city. But I was the one in cuffs. My father was in Washington when he got the call. I can only imagine the scene in his chambers, the leather-bound books seeming to mock him. He was on the next plane home, a storm contained in a tailored suit. He arrived not as a justice, but as a father, his faith in the system he served facing its first true test. The prosecutor was a man named Leo Brennan, ambitious, polished, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was running for district attorney, and his campaign needed fuel. A quick, high-profile conviction was premium gasoline. I was the match. Brennan's case was a house of cards, but he was a master illusionist. The security footage was corrupt. My rock-solid alibi, I was logged into an online study group with a dozen witnesses, was dismissed as the word of friends. The centerpiece of his case was a black hoodie, found in my closet, which he claimed matched the one worn by the robber in the grainy, darkened stills he showed the jury. My defender, Maya Joshi, was a public defender who moved with the weary grace of someone who had been fighting a losing war for too long. She was brilliant, ferocious, and drowning. She saw the holes, the inconsistencies, the stench of a setup. "They're offering a deal, Devin," she told me one day in the bleak, windowless room where we prepare my defense. "Plead to a lesser charge. You'll be out in 9 months. My father, sitting beside me, stiffened. "He will not plead guilty," he said, his voice a low rumble of authority. "We trust in the process." I believed him. I believed in the process. I walked into that courtroom every day with my back straight, wearing a suit my father had bought me, believing that truth was a light, so bright it couldn't be hidden. I was wrong. The trial was a performance, and Brennan was the star. He painted me as a privileged kid who thought the rules didn't apply, a narrative that played perfectly to a jury predisposed to see a confident black teenager as a threat. He took my aspirations, my father's legacy, and twisted them into evidence of arrogance. Officer Garrett testified, his voice a monotone of certainty about my nervous and evasive behavior during the arrest, a fiction I was powerless to combat. The day the verdict came down, the courtroom was unnaturally still. I remember the foreperson, a woman who had refused to look at me throughout the trial, finally meeting my eyes. There was no pity there, only a grim satisfaction. Guilty. The word was a physical force. It stole the air from my lungs. My mother's sob was a sound I will carry to my grave. My father did not move. He became a statue of himself, his face a mask of utter, profound disbelief. The system he had dedicated his life to, the institution he revered, had just looked at his son and seen a criminal. As they led me away in chains, I looked back at him. The message in my eyes was clear. This is your process. Prison is a world designed to erase you. The noise, the constant threat, the soul-crushing monotony. I held on to my innocence like a life raft, but the waves of institutional indifference were relentless. My father visited, his face etched with new, permanent grief. Our conversations were strained, filled with the unspoken horror of what had happened. "The appeal is drafted, son. We will fight this," he would say, his voice lacking its former conviction. "Appeals are your world, not mine." I replied one day, the numbness of my voice frightening even to me. "In here, I'm not Justice Cartwright's son. I'm just inmate number 78432. You always said the system works. Does it feel like it's working now?" He had no answer. While I languished, Maya Joshi refused to let go. The loss was a splinter in her mind. She spent her nights, her weekends, buried in the mountain of discovery, looking for thread that would unravel Brennan's tapestry of lies. And then she found it. It was in the evidence log, a dry, bureaucratic document. Item #A17. Black hoodie, seized from the Cartwright residence. She compared the chain of custody signatures. Officer Garrett's was there, clear as day, but beneath it, almost scrubbed out by a poor photocopier, was another signature. She pulled up the digital file, zoomed in, and enhanced the image. Her heart stopped. The signature was L. Brennan. Leo Brennan, the prosecutor, had signed out the key piece of evidence before the trial. He hadn't just presented a weak case. He had actively tampered with it. He had taken a generic hoodie from my closet and, in the eyes of the jury, transformed it into the robber's garment. He hadn't just prosecuted me. He had framed me. Her call to my father was frantic. "Justice Cartwright, it's Maya." He framed him. Brennan framed him. I have the proof. What happened next was not born of legal strategy, but of a father's furious love. My father did not call the Attorney General. He did not file a motion. He went to his chambers in our home, and he put on his robe, the black robe of a Supreme Court Justice. It was no longer a symbol of the system. It was a weapon to be used against it. He walked into the county courthouse, a place he hadn't set foot in for decades. He strode past security, his robe billowing behind him, a figure of immense, terrifying authority. Reporters, sensing a seismic event, scrambled after him. He pushed open the doors of a courtroom where Leo Brennan was, ironically, prosecuting another young man. The proceedings ground to a halt. The judge, a man named Henley, looked up, his jaw slack. "Justice Cartwright, what is the meaning of this?" Brennan turned. The color drained from his face, leaving a waxy, pale mass of pure terror. He looked like a man seeing his own ghost. My father's voice, accustomed to echoing in the highest court in the land, was calm, yet it filled every corner of the room. "I am here to report corruption of justice that began in this very building." He held up the evidence log. "This man, ADA Leo Brennan, conspired to fabricate evidence and secure the wrongful conviction of my son, Devin Cartwright. I hold here the proof of his evidence tampering, his own signature on a chain of custody form for a piece of evidence he later presented as damning proof." Brennan found his voice, a desperate, reedy thing. "This is an outrage, a intimidation tactic. You have no proof." "You are correct, counselor," my father boomed, his gaze pinning Brennan to the spot. "It is an outrage. The outrage is you. I demand you be held in contempt, disbarred, and charged with suborning perjury, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice." He took a step forward, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "You wanted a conviction, Brennan. You will have one. Your own." The room erupted. Cameras flashed. The bailiff, looking stunned, moved to take Brennan into custody. The system, for one breathtaking moment, had turned and bitten its own corrupt tail. The unraveling was swift. With my father's colossal influence and Maya's dogged evidence, my conviction was overturned. The doors of the prison opened, and I walked out, squinting in the sunlight like a creature emerging from a cave. The air had never tasted so sweet. Maya was there, finally allowing herself a true, triumphant smile. And my father was there, out his robes, just a man in a simple suit. We looked at each other, the chasm of the past months between us. "You were right," I said, my voice hoarse. "The process worked. He shook his head, his eyes glistening. No, son, the process failed. Catastrophically. It took a desperate public defender working through the night and a father abusing the power of his office to force it to work. That is not justice. That is a catastrophe we narrowly averted. He put a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. You asked me if the system worked. It doesn't. Not for those it was designed to crush. I've been blind to the chasm between the law on the page and the law on the street. But I see it now. You showed me. In the weeks that followed, a strange peace settled between us. The naive faith was gone, replaced by a clear-eyed, hardened resolve. My father began drafting a new kind of document, not a legal opinion, but a letter of resignation from the Supreme Court. He explained it to me one evening in his study, surrounded by the ghosts of his old beliefs. I cannot sit on that bench, writing opinions about a fair system, knowing what I know, he said, knowing what was done to you, and knowing it is done to thousands of young men without a father in a black robe. My voice on the court is a whisper. My voice on the outside can be a roar. But his resignation was only the beginning. He slid a brochure across the desk to me. It read, "The Cartwright Justice Initiative. We're starting a new fight," he said. "We will fund public defenders, investigate wrongful convictions, and lobby for evidence reform. We will do from the outside what I failed to do from within." He looked at me, not as a successor to a legacy, but as a partner in a new one. I spent my life interpreting the law. I want to spend the rest of it changing it, but I can't do it alone. I need someone who knows the other side of the gavel. I picked up the brochure. I thought of the jittery cashier, of Officer Garrett's tired eyes, of Leo Brennan's ambition. I thought of the kids in my neighborhood, the ones who wouldn't have a Supreme Court justice for a father. I thought of the countless other Devins, their stories silenced by a convenient fiction, and a system that didn't care to listen. Pre-law was always the plan. I said, a new, hard-won determination settling in my soul. I just never knew what for. I looked my father in the eye. Now I do. The story of the prosecutor, who framed a black teen, did not end with an exoneration. It ended with a legacy. A Supreme Court justice had stepped down from his bench to join his son, who had been victimized by the very system he served. Together, we were no longer just a family. We were a movement. The gavel had fallen, shattering one future. But in its ruins, we were building something stronger, something real. Our fight was just beginning. Subscribe for more intense social justice stories and real-world-inspired dramas, like Comet, and share to amplify the fight against racial profiling. Bell at the bell for updates on stories that expose injustice and inspire change.